Nothing was wrong, at least not in a way that was easy to point at. There was no crisis, no dramatic failure, no moment where everything collapsed. If someone had asked how my life was going, I would have said it was fine, and that answer would have been honest. That's what made it confusing. From the outside, my life looked stable, predictable, reasonable. I had responsibilities. I showed up where I was supposed to. I handled what needed to be handled. There was structure. There were routines. There were explanations for why things felt heavy sometimes. I told myself this was normal, that this was just adulthood, that life wasn't meant to feel exciting all the time. Nothing was wrong. And because nothing was wrong, I didn't look any deeper. I didn't question the direction. I didn't examine the choices. I didn't ask uncomfortable questions. When everything appears to be working, you assume it doesn't need to be examined. That's the quiet trap. I wasn't unhappy. I wasn't miserable. I wasn't struggling in any obvious way. I was functioning. And functioning can look a lot like fulfillment if you don't pause long enough to tell the difference. My days followed familiar patterns. Wake up, get ready, go where I needed to go. Repeat conversations I'd already had many times before. Even rest felt scheduled. Even free time had rules. Weekends weren't something I anticipated. They were something I recovered through. Nothing was broken. So I assumed nothing needed attention. I thought dissatisfaction would be loud, obvious, impossible to ignore. I didn't expect it to arrive quietly. It showed up as a lack of reaction. Moments that should have felt meaningful passed without leaving much behind. Good news didn't excite me the way it used to. Milestones felt strangely empty. Time moved forward, but I didn't feel myself moving with it. I told myself I was just tired, that everyone felt like this, that this was part of growing older, and maybe that was true. But something subtle was happening underneath. I was slowly lowering my expectations of life. Not intentionally, not consciously, just little by little. When you stop expecting too much, you stop noticing what's missing. Nothing was wrong, but nothing felt particularly right either. I didn't feel pulled toward anything. I didn't feel curious. I didn't feel restless in a way that demanded action. I felt neutral, and neutrality can be dangerous because it doesn't create urgency. Urgency is what forces you to look closer. Without it, you keep going. I kept telling myself I was lucky, that other people had real problems, that I had no right to question a life that worked. So I didn't. I stayed loyal to routines that felt safe. I stayed consistent, dependable, reliable. People trusted me. They counted on me. And I took pride in that. Responsibility gave me an identity. It explained why I stayed, why I didn't change things, why I didn't ask for more. Responsibility is convincing. It sounds mature, it sounds reasonable. But responsibility without honesty slowly turns into quiet resentment. Not toward others, toward yourself. I realized later that I had confused stability with satisfaction. Just because something is stable doesn't mean it's aligned. Just because nothing is wrong doesn't mean everything is right. But no one teaches you how to recognize that difference. We're taught to notice pain, We're taught to fix problems. We're not taught to question comfort. Comfort can be misleading. It smooths the edges. It makes things tolerable. And tolerable feels like enough, especially when you've been busy for a long time. I didn't hate my life. That's what delayed everything. If I had hated it, I might have changed something sooner. But I didn't. I just felt slightly disconnected from it, as if I was living a version of life that made sense on paper but didn't fully belong to me anymore. That realization didn't come all at once. There was no single moment, no dramatic insight, just a quiet thought that appeared one day. If nothing changes, this is what my life will continue to look like. Not worse, not better. Just this. That thought didn't scare me. It unsettled me. Because it felt accurate, I understood then that nothing being wrong had allowed me to stop asking questions. I had stopped asking myself what I actually wanted, not what made sense, not what was responsible, not what other people expected. What I wanted. That question felt unfamiliar, almost inappropriate, as if wanting something different meant rejecting what I already had. So I avoided it. I told myself wanting more was ungrateful, that questioning was indulgent, that stability was something to protect at all costs, but stability without intention becomes stagnation. And stagnation doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly. I began to see how often I chose familiarity over curiosity, how often I chose certainty over possibility, not because I was afraid, but because nothing pushed me to choose otherwise. Nothing was wrong. That was the problem. There was no external reason to change, no pressure, no collapse. So the responsibility to act would have had to come from inside. And I wasn't listening closely enough. I realized I had been waiting for permission, for something to break, for something to force my hand. But life doesn't always do that. Sometimes it gives you a life that works and waits to see if you'll notice that you've outgrown it. Nothing was wrong with my life, but it no longer fit the person I was becoming, and I hadn't allowed myself to admit that. Admitting it didn't mean abandoning everything. It didn't mean starting over. It didn't mean dramatic change. It just meant being honest about the fact that comfort had become a substitute for clarity. Honest about the fact that stability had turned into an excuse, honest about the fact that I had been avoiding the quiet truth because it was harder to explain than a problem. Problems come with solutions. They give you something to fix. A life where nothing is wrong forces you to take responsibility for what you choose next. That's uncomfortable. There's no one to blame, no obvious reason, no clear next step, just a question that keeps returning if you don't push it away. Is this how I want to keep living? I didn't answer that question immediately. I still haven't answered it completely. But I stopped pretending it didn't exist. And that changed something. Not overnight, not dramatically, but permanently. Nothing was wrong. And that was the problem, because it allowed me to drift without ever deciding where I was going. Once I saw that clearly, I couldn't unsee it. And even though nothing collapsed, something shifted. I stopped measuring my life only by whether it worked. I started paying attention to whether it felt true. That distinction made all the difference.